Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to my book reading. I am your host, Amran Nordin. Today, we will be continuing with the reading of the book Islam and Secularism by Syed Muhammad Naquib al-Attas.
Chapter 1. The Contemporary Western Christian Background. About 10 years ago, the influential Christian philosopher, and one regarded by Christians as among the foremost of this century, Jacques Maritain, described how Christianity and the Western world were going through a grave crisis brought about by contemporary events arising out of the experience and understanding and interpretation of life in the urban civilization, as manifested in the trend of neo-modernist thought which emerged from among the Christians themselves and the intellectuals, philosophers, theologians, poets, novelists, writers, artists, who represent Western culture and civilization. Since the European Enlightenment, stretching from the 17th to the 19th centuries, and with the concomitant rise of reason and empiricism, and scientific and technological advances in the West, English, Dutch, French, and German philosophers have indeed foreshadowed in their writings the crisis that Maritain described, though not quite in the same manner and dimension, for the latter was describing in conscious and penetrating perception the events of contemporary experience only known as an adumbrated prediction in the past. Some Christian theologians in the earlier half of this century also foresaw the coming of such a crisis, which is called secularization.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen. The writer begins his book by highlighting to us the arrival of a crisis that was first experienced in the Western world. This crisis was to cause a great upheaval, or at least was sufficiently significant to cause concern in the Western world and to Christianity. Since the crisis had started in the West, al-Attas chose to describe the crisis initially from the point of view of the Western and Christian intellectuals, since they were the first to describe it. Al-Attas says this crisis was the product of a few major factors, namely the experience and understanding and interpretation that was the result of the urbanization and the modern experience that Western Europe especially had been experiencing. It is interesting that Al-Attas linked this crisis to the, I quote, experience and understanding and interpretation, unquote, of the intellectuals of this civilization. This is because, as we shall see later, al-Attas himself defines knowledge, or as we Muslims call it, ilm, as the arrival of meaning, ma'na, to the soul. This experience and understanding and interpretation is that arrival of meaning to the souls of these Western intellectuals, even though some may not believe in the existence of souls. This knowledge of the West was colored by their experience, in especially Western Europe, since the Enlightenment, which could be seen as Western man reaching his maturity as compared to the Renaissance, which was just his rebirth. That is where he began to take his first tentative steps away from the shackles of religion and superstition. This came to the fore with the Western man embracing pure rationalism and empiricism as the yardstick for arriving at truth, which itself gave rise to the scientific and technological progress that they had made. In other words, because of this, the Western men, meaning the intellectuals, began to wonder if there was a need to relook at the very foundations of both Western civilization and Christianity, and the direction the two should be heading. These intellectuals were at the forefront of Western civilization and Christianity. They were the ones who will try to make sense for the West about what was happening around them. They included philosophers, theologians, poets, novelists, writers, and artists. Among them were those who were religionists and non-religionists, Among them were also those who see these changes with a sense of foreboding and those who welcomed and embraced the changes. But what seemed common among them was the sense that this impending change would be inexorable and unavoidable. The only issue at hand was how they would deal with it. What was once a conjectural and perhaps nebulous idea among these intellectuals was described more clearly by Jacques Maritain in the 1950s, as he had perhaps seen sufficiently of the impact of this crisis which was befalling the West. This crisis that these intellectuals tried to face head-on is known as secularization. Alhamdulillah, with that, I hope this short explanation of the text that has been read from the book, Islam and Secularism, has been useful. Inshallah, we will meet again in my next video, where we will continue with another reading of the book. If you like this video, you may want to click on the like button. Also, do subscribe to my channel. If you wish to be alerted to my latest video uploads, click on the bell button and you will be notified every time I do so, inshallah.